Welcome to Making Sense with Steve. Today we're going to cover feminism. To understand feminism, you need to understand it is two parts. The first part is the female or woman side of it. The second part is the government side of it. So, if you can imagine the two of them running parallel to each other and benefiting each other. The beginning. The beginning was with Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was the very first president to force the will of the federal government over the sovereign rights of the states. This was the seed that was planted that has created this huge monster that we have now called the federal government. This seed will become critical for the success of feminism in America. The beginning of the female side of feminism. Prohibition, as I understand it, was originally intended to conserve grain to make it available for the troops in World War I. The only problem is that World War I ended before Prohibition took effect. Now, I'd have no facts, but what I believe occurred was the government had somehow gotten women involved in marching and protesting for Prohibition. And once it got started, just because the war ended, they couldn't just tell all the women, forget about it, because they already had them all wound up. And so the women ended up getting Prohibition pushed through. What the government saw was the power that women had. So the government went ahead and gave women the right to vote. Now the dates that all this took place was Prohibition was passed on January 16th of 1919. Women's right to vote was passed in Congress on June 4th of 1919. Prohibition went into effect on January 17th of 1920. Women's right to vote was ratified on August 18th of 1920. Another interesting fact was by the end of 1920, if I remember correctly from what I read, it was November, organized crime was in full swing and had complete control over the alcohol industry. Prior to this, we did not have organized crime. It has escaped me while the feminists have not proudly bragged that they were instrumental in the beginning of organized crime in America. This was the beginning of what we would see to come many, many decades later. The mistake with giving women the right to vote was that America is a warring nation. Prior to just recently, and when I say just recently, I'm talking about President Trump. Prior to that, America used war primarily for two purposes. One, to stimulate the economy. The second reason was population control. We would cull our young males by sending them off to war, who would, a certain number of them, obviously, would be killed. And the concept was, is once a woman got pregnant, she was out of circulation for 9 months. She couldn't get more pregnant. And you didn't need as many men to maintain the population of a country. Well, where this came in to be a problem is that giving women the right to vote, they already were the majority of the population in the country. This should have never occurred. What we should have done, in my opinion, was made it head of household. So, if you have a woman who is the head of the house, there's no man, it's her, she can vote. The vote is head of household. One household, one vote. Giving women the right to vote was also the very first crack in the institution of marriage. Given human nature, men and women were probably started out trying to talk about it. Since women are socialists by nature, they go to bathrooms in groups, and men aren't, you naturally would have a conflict in who each of them thought would be best to vote for. And I imagine the natural progression of this went to arguing about it, to finally just not speaking about it at all with each other. It was the beginning of keeping secrets from your spouse, from both sides. The first crack in the institute of marriage. And that pretty much covers the beginning of both sides of the feminist movement. As we moved forward through the years, as a nation, we passed laws that protected women. And I believe their intention is to protect women who were victimized, basically spent their entire life in the home and took care of their family and their husband, and then for whatever reason their husband would divorce them and leave, midlife crisis, whatever it is. And the intention was good, and I believe to some extent these laws worked. They worked primarily because you had to have a reason to have a divorce. You couldn't just walk in and say, I'm just not happy anymore. That didn't fly. Now we advance into the 60s and early 70s. This was what a lot of people call second wave feminism. This was crazy. I grew up during this time. You had women in the streets yelling and screaming, burning their bras, equal this, equal that. Basically what it came down to is they wanted to run around and be whores and be proud and brag about it. That's really all it ever came down to. And they succeeded. And that's another feather they should be wearing proudly in their caps. And to some extent, some of them are trying to today. I was 6 years old and I looked at the whole situation. I said to myself, this is not going to work. The men aren't going to change. The only thing that's going to happen is they're not going to marry the women. That's it. Then came more laws. Because women are all about trying to force their will upon someone else. And if they can't do it themselves, you see it all the time, they'll call the police and claim domestic abuse. Why? Because these laws have been stacked up. If that's not sufficient enough, they'll lobby Washington. Once again, here's this government, the big government, because you have to be able to centrally distribute your ideology. And with the federal government, that's exactly what they were doing. You would see it with highway department, mandatory 55 mile an hour. If you didn't set the highway speeds in your state to 55 miles an hour, we're not going to give you federal dollars to fix your roads. Well, the feminists, they took that same concept and forced their ideology across the entire nation, right down into our school system. They, in 1962, got prayer taken out of school. I read a study some years back where they had asked teachers what the worst things were in the classroom in 1962 when this happened. And it was missing the trash can, daydreaming, things of that nature. The next time they asked was in 30 years later. And the teachers said rape, drugs, violence. Just an interesting correlation there between the two of them. Then you had Roe v. Wade. What was interesting about Roe v. Wade is the American people never got to vote. Nobody got to vote. It was just shoved down our throat by this woman. One woman did this to the entire nation. Then came no-fault divorce. And what the feminists did was they coupled the no-fault divorce to the laws that were set to protect women back when you had to have a reason for divorce. And so divorce became a retirement fund for women. Men, and still to this day, are being financially raped in the family court system by women who only see them as a check. They can marry a man, then just say they're unhappy. They find another man. They divorce the first one. They take the bulk of what he's got and totally break his back financially trying to defend himself in court legally. And for some reason, nobody seems to think this is a problem. It's a huge problem. So we had those laws added in. What other interesting laws have we had added by women? DUIs. This is a very dangerous type of law. Pushed through by mothers against drunk drivers. Isn't that wonderful? Now, I personally believe that if you're not able to maintain control of your vehicle, you should be removed from it. But I have to ask, what crime has been committed? Who has been transgressed? Whose property was destroyed? What human being was harmed? We are arresting people based on what might happen. Let that sink in for a minute. Women push through a law to arrest people for what might happen. I don't think people should be allowed to drive if they're unable to maintain control. But I also don't believe it should totally destroy their life. But that is the nature of female. to totally destroy you if you do not do what they say. What other laws have been pushed by female? Started with mandatory seatbelts, then mandatory helmets, then came mandatory insurance. Why? Why would I say this is pushed by female? Well, I go back to DUI. I go to female nature. Females are ruled by fear. They are afraid that if you are intoxicated, that you are going to kill someone. So you need to go to jail. They are afraid that you're going to get into a car accident. So you need to have insurance. And the government, they're just rolling right along with it. They're taking the feminist money and forcing these agendas down everybody's throat. As we progress, we're watching things as outrageous as the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. A woman with no evidence, doesn't remember anything, is accusing him, and we're all just supposed to step back and say, oh yeah, she said it and it's true. And this is a very scary precedence, but it's a natural progression from things like the DUI laws. We're getting to a point where there's just no due process. That the way that we have done laws since the beginning of this country, no, that's wrong. It's wrong. We need to just do whatever women say. That's scary. Very scary. If we go back to Genesis, I believe it's either chapter 36 or 39, verse 1 through 20. It tells us the story of Joseph. Joseph in his coat of many colors. This coat was totally unique. When Joseph went to work for Pharaoh as a servant in his house, and as time progressed, Pharaoh ended up giving him complete control over his entire household. Pharaoh's wife took a liking to Joseph, and she decided she was going to seduce him. And Joseph had told her no, and this continued, and he kept telling her no, and one day she went after him and got a hold of his coat. Well, he slipped his coat and left. Well, then she hollered and screamed for the other men in the house. And when they came in, she said that Joseph tried to rape her. And in his haste to get away when she screamed, which he had already left before she screamed, that he had forgot his coat, and that was her proof. Joseph was put in prison. If false rape allegations are so rare, why did God see fit to put it in the Bible? It was important enough to be put in the Bible. The story of false rape allegations. I listen to people all the time tell me, oh, it's an old book and it's about 2,000 years ago and blah, 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 blah. Human nature is human nature. It hasn't changed from day one. We now have women running around in the streets naked, screaming at the top of their lungs. And this is for feminism. It's female empowerment. We used to gather these people up and put them in asylums. There are children out there. These women could care less about anything. And everything seems to be rooted in sex. The pussy hats, all of it. It's all about what's between their legs. But yet they try and project it onto men as being that way. I noticed an interesting correlation. Second wave feminists began in the 60s, really took hold in the early 70s, very late 60s and early 70s. I was researching mass shootings. And pretty much prior to 1970, mass shootings were almost non-existent. And now we have mass shootings. And the feminists teamed up with the government and now want to take away firearms. What a brilliant idea. This hasn't worked anywhere that it's been tried. But it'll work this time because, I don't know, I guess a woman said it. Instead of getting rid of feminism, which appears to me to be a direct link to mass shootings, no, let's get rid of the firearms and keep feminism. There's been an explosion, a literal explosion of mental health problems in people. And I personally believe it's because they're chasing an impossibility, and their rhetoric makes no sense whatsoever. They don't even make sense to themselves, but they keep pumping it out like a parrot. But when forced to actually sit and think about the logic, there is none. Absolutely zero. And I think this is causing a mental meltdown on them. Single motherhood rate. Prior to welfare, there was a cry out of the black community that the single motherhood rate had reached 25%. And this was terrible. We need to do something about this. Then came welfare. And welfare told them, you get the man out of the house and you can marry the government. The government will give you a check. We now have the white community, which is the lowest rate of single mothers, is now at 30%. I don't remember who it was, but it was a video I watched from a black gentleman, one of the more well-known ones. And he said, we are the canary in the coal mine. Don't make the same mistake. But we are. We're following the exact same path. And look at how our children are turning out. It's terrible. Single mothers are not heroes. They are a cancer. They're the result of bad policies. Children from single mothers. Over 80% of the people incarcerated come from a household of a single mother. Single mother households are responsible for the majority of high school dropouts. Single mother households are responsible for the majority of gang members. None of this is anything to be proud of, just like organized crime. But this is what feminism has brought us. Television. Television started this push. I've been told Brady Bunch was the first show where Florence Henderson walked around in a really thin nightgown and the two of them slept in the same bed. Prior to that, I don't remember men and women sleeping in the same bed. Lucy and Ricky were actually married and they slept in separate beds on television. So that has progressed to what we have now. If I had small children now, I wouldn't even have a television in my home. Period. There's nothing but pure garbage out there. We have, in the Bible, there's a part in the Bible that says, in the end times, good will become evil and evil will become good. Fox has this show called Lucifer, I believe, where it's literally the devil who is supposed to be working as a police detective, supposed to be the good guy. We had Jane the Virgin. If this wasn't a pure mockery of the Virgin Mary, I don't know what is. It's absurd. You can say whatever you want, Satan, all this stuff, negative, but you're not allowed to reference God or Jesus Christ. It's interesting. Very interesting. Every time the feminist movement runs low on money, they pick up a new cause. Their first cause was the black community. The next one they moved to was the gays and lesbians. And now they're into the trans people. Those people, all of that is just, that's a mental problem. Period. By design, gay, lesbian, whatever you want to call it, is self-induced genocide. That is a mental problem. Period. They obviously hate people so much, they don't want people to exist anymore. But on top of that, Michael Knowles did a talk. And in his talk, he ran down the 7 deadly sins. And the worst of the 7 deadly sins was pride, or is pride. And he presented the question, why would they choose to name it gay pride? They are point blank telling you we are the worst of the worst. And people are jumping on board and trying to say, oh, this is normal. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's a mental issue, and it should be dealt with accordingly. If it was so normal, why are so many homosexuals in prison? John Wayne Gacy, what if I had 33 boys buried underneath his house? Homosexual. Jeffrey Dahmer, homosexual, cannibal. And I didn't go through a whole list of serial killers, but I'm sure we're going to find a ton of them. These people, feminists, they need to be stopped. It was weak men that allowed it to get to this point. And the only solution to this is going to be strong men. Now I present the issue of the future of our society. Can it be saved? And quite honestly, I'm not real sure. If it is going to be saved, it'll be saved by the conservative Christians. The liberals, they're pushing the whole abortion thing. I mean, how morally corrupt is that? Following the current trend he extrapolated it out. And within 50 years, barely more than a generation, conservatives will outnumber liberals. Not by much, but they will. In 200 years, assuming we're still around, it will be 97% conservative and 3% liberal. You guys are doing this to yourselves. There is a few verses, I wish I remembered which ones they were. They're in Ecclesiastes. But the one verse talks about the wise man's heart is in his right hand and the fool's heart is in the left. Feminists call themselves the left. Democrats call themselves the left. Liberals call themselves the left. Just another interesting correlation I found. Women are more unhappy now than they were at the beginning of second wave feminism. And why is that? They have so much more of what they said that they had to have. I believe it's because they don't have men. Men have walked away. They said, this is what you want? Good enough. Have fun. We'll see you later. And you're listening to women complain about it. They can't find a good man. They can't find a husband. Good men don't want whores. You can't turn a whore into a housewife. That's all there is to it. People have asked, what do women truly want? And I go back to the Garden of Eden. And this gives us the female nature. Very beginning of the Bible. God created woman for Adam. Adam gave her a name, called her woman, and explained all the rules in the Garden of Eden. Don't mess with that one tree. She had the entire Garden of Eden, paradise, available to her. Just don't mess with that one tree. What did she do? She went and ate from the tree. Then she convinced Adam to eat from the tree. And God come down and was having his talk with him. And when he got to the woman, she said, the snake beguiled me. So what have we learned about female nature? Females will never be satisfied. There will never be enough. And on top of that, they blame someone else for their actions. They refuse to take responsibility. If you believe biblically, the very first woman was this way. I think I've about covered it all. We'll get deeper into it as I cover other topics such as education. But a lot of this needs to be undone. Just literally undone. The longer we allow this to go, the more destruction they are going to do in our society. The more harm they are going to do. And it will become total chaos. Pythagoras said, there is a good principle which created order, light, and man, and an evil principle which created darkness, chaos, and woman. You are watching the chaos happen. That's it for me.